What's a good word? DKB here. So I actually crafted a trade scenario myself. This isn't tied to any rumors. This isn't tied to any kind of mock simulations or anything like that. But recently, news dropped for the Detroit Lions as well as I believe the Vikings and maybe a third team. There were some more violations of the gambling policy that came up. We, as New York Jets fans, will be familiar with this with our former wide receiver coach, Miles Austin, going through something similar. But basically, the Lions' wide receiver depth chart got, absolutely ravaged by what happened here. They lost Quintez Cephas, who they released right away. He has an indefinite suspension. They lost Jamison Williams, and they lost Stanley Berryhill, both to 6-game suspensions. And so when you go and you look at this Lions wide receiver depth chart, suddenly you're taking a look at Amon-Ra St. Brown and then kind of everybody else, right? Jamison Williams was supposed to kind of be this hype factor. Quintez Cephas, I think, was maybe somewhat solid to a certain degree from what I remember. And then you have a bunch of guys that are kind of essentially the quintessential role player in that room. But Marvin Jones Jr. now kind of heads up the rest of this group along with Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond. And as if you're a Detroit Lions fan, I can't imagine that you're excited about, a 32 to 33-year-old wide receiver, Marvin Jones Jr., potentially being your next best option in that group. You also don't have a tight end that's going to, decimate a team. And then you're also, depending on how you feel about Jared Goff, talking about some limitations at the quarterback position, which, by the way, I'm actually a big fan of Jared Goff and what he was able to do last year, and would have loved to seen him get picked up, by the Jets at some point when we thought that he could have been released. But that aside, you're now talking about an unenviable position where it's too late in free agency to really go out there and grab you somebody that's solid. You can go out there and potentially trade, and the New York Jets, again, will probably be a good option for this as well if you want to think about trying to unload a guy like Corey Davis. But they're pretty limited. You basically are going to have to go the trade route, or you're going to have to adjust your draft plans and maybe focus on a wide receiver a little bit more to make up for this, a third of the games in the NFL that you're not going to have some of your most important weapons for. You're also going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of nullified over these first 7 games because, again, you don't have a weapon in the tight end room. You've lost some weapons in the running game with Jamal Williams. And then teams can basically zone in on Amon-Ra St. Brown and try to force everybody else to beat them. So it's going to be a tough road for Detroit until we see how these things pan out for them. I thought the New York Jets and the Detroit Lions could work something out that would work well for both parties. The New York Jets, in this particular situation, we're assuming that the top 3 tackles from a value and skill set perspective are going to be off the board. And so instead of kind of forcing a situation where maybe you like the guy, you don't love him, but it's the best of what you can get at that position, you trade back and you open up your options and you feel better about the value. And for the Detroit Lions moving up to pick 13, you get your choice in general of the top 2 wide receivers in the entire class, right? The 2 players that are most likely talked about as being a round 1 pick, you're going to hear Quentin Johnson, you're going to hear Jackson Smith-Njigba. And so when you get to that middle portion where the Jets and the Detroit Lions are, that's where things can get a little bit crazy. And if the Detroit Lions want to try to solidify something, continue to build a young wide receiver core, this would probably be their best bet. Jackson Smith-Njigba would give them, their next great slot wide receiver. Quentin Johnson is kind of more so the size, speed, athlete version. Essentially think like Stephen Hill for them almost, but, not as raw as what Stephen Hill was. But basically, you're getting that guy that you can go out there and develop. Another big body threat, has all the traits that you're going to look for. You're just hoping you can coach up some of the technical points for him in route running, high pointing the ball, using his hands so he's not, getting drops based off his body so much. But it's worth the risk, especially when you think about long-term. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Quentin Johnson, or Jackson Smith out there lined up, you will have one of the better wide receiver cores in the NFL. So let's talk about this trade, right? The Lions aren't going to be hurting to kind of make this deal done. We're talking about them having 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, 1 pick in the 3rd, 1 in the 5th. They have 2 in the 6th round. kind of came to a reasonable conclusion, went strictly based off the NFL trade value chart. And so with the 13th pick that the Jets own, we're looking at 1,150 points in terms of what, that ideally is going to be valued at. The Lions pick at 18 is worth 900. So we have a 250 point deficit. So here's the trade package. The Lions will be sending the 18th pick in round 1, the 81st pick in round 3 of this year's draft, and then they will send us a 2024 round 4 pick. And it's a slight overpayment. Basically, they will be sending us about 1,100, and I think it was like 92 points of value in that particular trade package. And that's because those lower picks from like the 5th round on out, they don't really make up the 61 point difference once they include that 3rd rounder. So the New York Jets can go a number of ways about this, right? There's 2 different versions. If you want to just go and grab a guy like Corey Davis, that relieves cap space for us. They go out there and kind of get them a certified, weapon in the NFL, knowing what Corey Davis has done over his career. Or if you prefer to just have the move up in the younger draft choice, then you give us the 1st, you give us the 3rd, you give us a 4th the following year, and you're still talking about being able to go out there and make your same 2 picks or at least 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, and then you still have day 3 to go out there and try to attack and see what else you can fill need-wise or trade down. There's a bunch of options still available for the Detroit Lions in this scenario. And then, of course, from the Jets, they would only be getting the 13th pick. But I think this is a very realistic trade, again, for all the things I mentioned, the wide receiver depth chart pretty much being annihilated, trying to go about a smart way to fill the need here and not just take, shots in the dark for the most part. And this is just kind of one of those adjustable things on the fly. So I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit crazy. Maybe I'm overthinking things a little bit much here. But I think this could be a realistic trade that we actually see on draft day as the board, falls. We get to that 10th, 11th pick and we realize no wide receivers have still been picked. We're seeing Broderick Jones go. We're seeing Paris Johnson go. We're seeing Peter Skoronski come off. And we get that call from the Detroit Lions. I think this is exactly the kind of deal that we would look for. Not to mention at the 18th pick, again, the value and the players available to us most likely are going to be much better. Darnell Wright, still one of the favorite tackles of mine in this potential round 1 range, and the value at 18 is better than what people would be willing to say at 13 for a guy like him. But you're also talking about still maybe having guys like Brian Branch available to you, Kalijah Kancey, Brian Bresee at defensive tackle, which would be much better values. Probably more so Brian Bresee. And if you want to get crazy and probably say a wide receiver, right, you can still probably go that route. Or probably say between 13 and 18, you're still looking at the Detroit Lions probably being the only team to pick one of those guys. So you still get a JSN, or you still go out there and potentially get a Quentin Johnson and maybe replace like a Corey Davis for the long term if you want to get crazy with it. So I don't know. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. If you're a Detroit Lions fan, do you take the risk of moving up to try to secure that depth chart? Or do you guys stay where you're at and kind of hope the board falls in your favor? And then from the Jets' perspective, if we do move back to the 18th pick, who would you be willing to say is the pick at that point? I'm personally still going to go Darnell Wright, most likely, if it's me. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking. I'll catch you guys again. Peace.